In this lesson, we will be filtering the data in our bucket list so that we do not display the completed bucket list items. Alright, so let's navigate into the list view builder, which is responsible for building these items. So here it is. So there is a condition over here. We check if the data in this index is actually a map. If it's a map, then we'll be rendering this list style, and if not, we'll be rendering this invisible sized box, right? So we can keep another condition over here which checks for the completed key in the map object. So if the completed key on this map object is set to true, then we will not be rendering it, and if it's set to false, only then we will be rendering this list style. Alright, so let's keep another condition over here. So and meaning that if this condition matches and another condition matches, then only we will be displaying this list style. So let's wrap words first, and if this data completed key equals to false, and let's wrap it within parenthesis. So if the data is a map object and the completed is set to false, the completed key in that map object is set to false, then only we will be displaying this list style. So save the code, and now we only have this item which completed is set to false. Alright, so this skydiving that is over here has already been completed. So now let me show you a simple way for checking the condition. So if there is a condition and you want to check if the condition is false, then instead of using this equals to false, you can use an exclamation sign in front of the condition. This will check if this condition is false. If you want to check if it's true, you can use it without the exclamation mark, and if you use the exclamation sign, then this will check if this condition is false. Alright, so now I'll be changing the status of this item to completed. So mark is complete. So now this item is also complete, but this list is empty and we are not getting this text widget that says no data on bucket list. So why is that? And this is because despite of items being completed, they are still in our bucket list data, right? We are using the condition to hide the completed data by rendering this invisible widget, but actually data is not removed from our bucket list. So instead of using this bucket list data, we will be creating a new list, and that list will be a filtered list created from this bucket list data that will only hold the map objects in which the completed is set to false. Alright, and we will be checking the length of that. So instead of using this condition over here, we will be using this condition in our list data widget. So let's remove this and let's move into this widget, and here let's create a new list with this bucket list data. Alright, so list dynamic, and we'll be naming it as filtered list equals to bucket list data dot where, and that will automatically suggest this arrow function over here. So dot to list. So if I leave this code as it is, then this filtered list will have no data inside of it because every element is returning false. So instead of returning false, we will be checking this element and then conditionally return true or false. Alright, and this element is a map object, so we can use element, and then we'll have a look at this key completed. So completed equals to false. Alright, so we are checking for all the elements or all the map objects inside of this bucket list, and we are only sending the data to this filtered list in which a map object completed key value is set to false. Alright, and here we know that for checking the false condition, instead of using this equals to false, we can simply place this exclamation sign in front of the condition. Alright, so this will check if this completed is false, and if this is false, then this condition will be true and the data will be sent to this filtered list, and this filtered list will only hold the data in which the completed is false. Alright, so now we can use this list for conditionally rendering the text. See this text widget that says no data on bucket list. So by using this where, we are able to filter the data and only keep the elements or map objects in which this completed key is set to false. So now let's move into the postman and repopulate the data. Let's rerun this add initial bucket list. Alright, and we have this data over here. So let's move into our app, and if I refresh it, then I'll be getting this list item because all of these are not completed for now. So if I want to complete this, I can click here and mark this as complete, and if this is completed, then we'll no longer show this list style. Instead, an invisible sized box is rendered here. Now whenever you are working with an API, you cannot be so sure that these data exist. So this element might also not exist. This might not be a map object, and this bucket list index might also not exist. So we always need to provide a fallback value. So let's wrap this with a parenthesis, and then if this does not exist, we will be providing false as an fallback value. Alright, and we'll do the same for this as well. So wrap this with a parenthesis. Alright, and here we will be providing a fallback value false. So as this is a boolean, the fallback value must also be a boolean. Alright, and this might also not exist, so this will also fall back to this false. So let's use a question mark over here. So if this does not exist, then this will fall back to false, and if this completed key is not in the map object, then also it will fall back to false. Alright, and this element might also be null, so let's provide question mark over here, so that if this is null, then it will automatically fall back to this false value. So that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we'll be working on adding data to our bucket list. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson we'll be working on adding data to our bucket list. So let's get started. Before we dive into our code, let's move into the postman and create a request for sending data to our server. So now let's create a new request in this collection for adding data to our server. So click at it and then add request. So now let's rename this to add data, add bucket list data. So in REST API, when you want to add a data into the database, or you want to send the data to the server for adding it to the database, you generally use this post request. But in real-time database, it's a little bit different. So what happens if I send this post request into our server? So let's move into this request, copy the API endpoint, paste it in this request, and let's move into this initial data again, and let's copy one of the map object, and then we'll be trying to send this map object using a JSON. So body, raw, and then type is JSON. Alright, so now let's paste the map object over here, and let's remove this comma and send the request. And we have this 200 OK status, and the data has been sent to the server. But if you have a look at this get request, so here in the response you can see that our data structure has been messed up. There is no list, there is only a map object inside of it, and there are multiple map objects inside of a single map object, and everything is changed in the response. Now this will mess up our app. So for adding the bucket list data, we will not be sending the post request. So let's reset the data by using this initial put request. So now the data has been reset. So let's move into this get request. So now if I send the request, everything seems fine now. So if you mess anything up, then you can always use this add initial bucket list. Alright. So now instead of using this post request, there is a different approach to adding a data into the bucket list. But generally in REST API, to add a data into the server, we use this post request, and this request seems about alright, but real-time database API works differently. This REST API of real-time database works in a mysterious way. So if we use the post request, then our data will be messed up in the response. So instead of post request, we will be using the patch request. But the patch method is generally used for modifying the data, but not to mess our response data. We must be using this patch request. This is an exception to REST API, but this is what it is. So if we want to add a new data into this bucket list, then we should be providing index in the URL. So if you look into this get request, then you can see that this visit Nepal is at 0 index of the list, and this skydiving is at the first index. So if you want to add the data right below this skydiving, then you should be defining that index in the API endpoint. And as we are trying to add data to the second index, we will be using /to.json, alright, and the method will be the patch method. And in this request body, we will be sending this map object only, not the list, alright. So let's send the request, and this visit Nepal has been added. So let's run this get request again, and here you can see that new data has been added at the second index. So now if you want to add another data in the third index, then move into this patch request and change this to 3, alright, and this will add the data to the third index. And here we have this new data in the third index, alright. So every time you want to add a new data into the database, then you must increment this index value, alright. So now let's move into the app and start working on adding data. So we have a lot of items over here. Let's leave it as it is, and let's navigate into this add bucket list.dart, this page. So now I'll be creating a button here to send a dummy data into the server. So let's use the body argument elevated button, and in onPress there will be an anonymous function, and the child will be a text widget. So now let's create a function over here so that we can send dummy data into the server. And instead of creating this function, we can copy it from this view item. So let's copy this mark as complete function because it is using this patch request. So let's have this navigator.pop with refresh, because when the data is added we need to refresh the list, so that's alright. So here let's replace this completed true map object with an actual map object from our postman. So let's navigate into the postman and let's copy this map object and replace this with the new object. Alright, let me wrap the words first. And now we'll be sending this data through a patch method into this API endpoint. But this API endpoint needs an increment index. So let's go ahead and create a new index in our class. So integer new index, and let's initialize in the constructor, remove this const, and then required this dot index, new index. Alright, and now let's use this widget dot new index over here. And now we need to pass this new index from our main screen. So let's move into the main screen. And here let's send the required argument new index over here. And the new index is the bucket list data dot length. So now let's save all of the codes. And you might need to auto restart your app. So auto restart. So now let's pass this add data function in the elevated button on pressed. Alright, so over here. And there are currently 4 items in this list. So open the new page, and if I click at this add data, so seems like the data has been added, but this list is not refreshing, and we'll have a look at that later. So let me go ahead and refresh this list manually. So you can see new data has been added to this list. Alright, so let's try adding the data again. So click at it, click at add data, refresh the page, and again new data has been added to the new index. Alright, so now let's work on this auto refresh. So when the data is added from this page, then this list will refresh automatically, right? So move into this main screen and find the code which is responsible for triggering this new screen. So this code, it is inside of this floating action button. So on pressed we have this navigator.push, so we can use .then here, which will have a function inside of it with the inconsistent space. So let's remove padding from here and then set the padding inside of the list style. And now we have a consistent space in our list style. So now let's work on sending the real bucket list item instead of sending this dummy data. Alright, so navigate into add bucket list, and here instead of this elevated button I'll be replacing it with a column. And the first child of this column will be the text field. And here there is no spacing, so let's wrap this column with a padding. And now we have this nice padding over here. So now let's provide a label to this text field. So decoration equals to input decoration label, and let's provide a text widget over here, activity or item. So this will provide a nice label to the text field, and we need text field for image and cost. So let's duplicate it, and this will be for the cost, estimated cost, and this will be for the image URL. All right. And now there is no spacing between them. So let's provide a size box widget with a height of 30 pixel between these widgets. So now we have a nice padding or nice spacing. And here we will be creating the elevated button with anonymous function in onPressed and text widget as a child. Alright. And we want this button to have full width, so let's wrap it with row and wrap this elevated button with expanded widget so it takes all the width. Alright. And let's use this sized box over here as well. And now we have a nice looking form over here. And when this button is clicked, we want to execute this add data, so let's copy this function and use it in the onPressed. Alright. And now instead of sending this dummy data, we will be getting the data from the text field. So let's use text editing controller over here. So text editing controller, and the first item will be the item text, which is equals to text editing controller class. Alright. And we'll do the same for cost and image URL as well. So this will be the cost text and this will be the image URL text. So now let's assign this controller to the text field. So we have this controller argument, and this will be the item text. Let's copy this and use it over here as well. This will be the cost text and this will be the image URL text. Alright, so these are the controllers. And now we can replace this with controller text value. So item text.text, and the cost will be the cost text.text. And the image URL will be image URL text.text. Alright, and we can leave this completed to false. So now let's save the code. And now let's try adding an item to the bucket list. So the item name will be a simple item, and the cost will be 2000, and image URL, let's keep it invalid. So click at this add item, and the item has been added to our list. Alright, the image URL is invalid, so we are getting this, but everything is working fine. So now if I try to add an empty item into our bucket list without having anything in the item estimated cost or image URL, and if I click this, then you can see that empty data will be added to our bucket list because we have no validations in our form. So in the next lesson, we will be working on validating forms. So how we can create forms and how we can validate a form in Flutter. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be working with forms and forms validation in Flutter. While working with Flutter app, we often build a form like this for getting the user input. But user input is not always what we expect. For instance, we have this estimated cost over here, which is an integer. Or I want certain input field to accept only number values. But in this estimated cost, a user can provide a string and there will be no validation and the string will be sent to the database. And that might be a problem. So for getting the desired input from a user, we will be using forms validation. And this is how it works. So now let's navigate into this add bucket list. And if we want to use a form, then we should be wrapping all of this component with the form widget. So let's navigate into the column where we have all this text field and elevated button. So this part. So now let's wrap it with an widget. And that widget is a form widget. So this form widget should be wrapping all of the widgets we want to apply validation on. Here, this form widget is wrapping all of this text field and the elevated button, right? So we have changed this part to a form. Now it does not matter how much nested these widgets are. As long as this form is a parent of these widgets, we can apply validation in any of these text fields. Alright. And we could have also wrapped this padding with form, but wrapping text field, and here instead of using this text field, we'll replace it by text form field. So the reason for replacing this text field with this text form field is that this text form field has an argument called validator, and this validator can be used for validating the form. So whenever you are creating a form and if there are text field inside of it, instead of using text field, you should be using this text form field. And this text form field is similar to the text field widget because it accepts all the argument of text field and it has an extra argument called validator. So let's replace this text fields with this new widget. Alright, so replace this and this as well. And now we have an argument inside of this text form field called validator. And this validator will have a function, callback function, and we'll have a callback value that will be the value of this text field. Alright, and now we can use this validator argument and this function for validating the data inside of this text field. Alright, so if we don't want this to be an empty value, we can write a condition over here. So if value, meaning the value of this text field, equals to null. So if the value is null or value dot is empty, then return a string saying that this must not be empty. So now let's move into this elevated button, and in this on pressed we'll be replacing this add data with a function, an anonymous function for now, and we'll be validating this form when this button is pressed. So let's save the code first, and now we can use the condition over here to validate the form. So if add form, which is the key of the form that we want to validate, dot current state and then the exclamation mark dot validate function. Alright, so if the validation is successful, then this function will return true, otherwise this will return false. So if this is true, then we'll be executing the add data. Alright, for now instead of this add data, let me replace it with a print statement. So print success. Alright, and then we'll be replacing this with add data later on. Else print something wrong. So now if I click at this add item without typing anything in this item field, then I'll be getting this validation error. So this must not be empty. So from this validator function, if you return any string, then this will act as an error message. Alright, and returning a null value means that everything is okay. So I can use this return null in the else statement. So return null. So if the text value is empty or null, then we'll be returning a string or we'll be returning an error message, and if not, we'll be returning null, meaning that everything is alright. So I can also use multiple validation logic over here. For instance, if I want this item to have minimum 3 characters, then I can write this condition over here. So if value.length is less than 3, then return must be more than 3 characters. Alright, and we are getting this error because dot is unknown of this value type, so this might not be a string, right? So we need to provide dot to string to make sure that this value is a string. Alright, so let's save the code, and now if I enter anything over here, and I'll be keeping it only 2 characters, so the length is 2. Now if I click at this add item, then I'll be getting this error, must be more than 3 characters. And as we can have multiple validations over here, we don't need this else statement. So if there is an error, then we will be returning a string which will be treated as an error message, but if there is no error, then it does not make any sense for returning a null, right? So we can remove this return null from this statement. And now let's copy this validator argument and use it in other part of our text field as well. So paste it over here and here as well. And now we have validation in all of these text fields. Alright. So now if I try to click this add item button without entering any data in these fields, then I'll be getting error on all of these text fields. Alright. So now we can only send the expected data to our server. So if I change this to a valid string, say eat an apple, auto validate mode dot on user interaction. Alright. So if you set this argument to auto validate mode dot on user interaction, this will be use forms and form validation for validating user input. So that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be working on finally wrapping up this bucket list project. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson we will be working on wrapping up our bucket list app. Main focus of this lesson is to create a scalable and maintainable folder structure. As you can see, we have multiple screens, but all of them are kept inside of this lib folder without any structure. So in this lesson, we will be creating a scalable and maintainable folder structure. So the first thing that I want to do here is to create a new folder called screens. And inside of this folder, I'll be keeping all the screens of our app. So currently we have these three screens over here, the add bucket list screen, main screen, and the view item screen. So let's rename them first to make it easier for us to navigate. Alright. So the first thing that I want to do is to rename this add bucket list to add underscore screen. So as the file name has been changed, VS Code is asking if it can refactor the imports. So click it OK so that the new file name is used everywhere. Alright. So now let's rename this main screen to main underscore screen as well. And it should be refactored. Alright. And then we have some issues in this, but it is solved automatically. So let's save this file. And then let's move to this view item and rename it to view underscore screen. Alright. Okay. Now if you are still getting an error, then you should check all the imports. Alright. So now let's select these three screens and move them to this screens folder. And once the files has been moved to a new folder, then we should be changing the import as well. So you might be getting error on this main.dart. So here it is. So this add screen and main screen is placed inside of this screens. So provide screens over here. Alright. And you might need to do this for multiple files. So you can also see that we have got error on this file as well. So here screens and then the add screen. And now everything seems to be fixed in our project. So if there is still error in the import, then you can go ahead and fix that as well. So save all the files. And now we have somewhat organized structure in our project, right? So all the screens are placed inside of this screen folder, and this main.dart, which is a main file, is placed outside in this lib folder. So the next thing that I want to do is to remove this number or the index from this page. So navigate into this view screen, and we have this text widget somewhere around here. So here it is. Let's remove it. And this ends our bucket list app. Now there are a lot of improvements that can be done in this app. For instance, you can use an INTL package for formatting this amount. You can send this amount to this new screen or view item screen and then display it over here somewhere. You can use this mark as complete as a button at the end of this screen, and there are a lot of things that can be done in this app. And I am sure that you'll make a lot of improvements in this app. So this is the end of our bucket list app, and I'm sure that you have learned a lot of things over here, and I'm sure that with that knowledge you'll build something beautiful. So that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you at the next section. Welcome to our next adventure, Fun Facts app, in which we'll be learning some advanced and pretty cool stuffs. We've got some cool stuffs ahead like PSV Builder, Switch Widget, consumers, and much more. In the main part, we'll explore how Flutter manages global states using something called provider. We'll understand the concept of global state management and use it for switching theme in our app. Not only that, we'll be creating a dummy read-only API through GitHub and use it in our Fun Facts app so that you can provide your users with fresh fun facts every time. In a nutshell, we are not just making a Fun Facts app, we are also getting hands-on with state management and a bit of internet wizardry. And as always, you can clone this project or view the project source code from my GitHub repository. Navigate into github.com/susandstc, move to repositories tab, search for Flutter, and you can clone this Flutter Fun Facts app with provider project. Alright? It's going to be a blast, so let's dive in and make our app both smart and entertaining.